knights, dedicated to Christ and his holy mother. We are the Knights of St. Michael.
When God created man and woman, he made them in his image and likeness, and called them good. Many years later, God spoke to the prophet Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you." Furthermore, we are told in the Gospels that John the Baptist was known by God, called by God, named by God, and filled with the Holy Spirit while still in his mother's womb. These moments in Scripture all point to one solid fact, that from his very beginning, man is man, fully alive and joined with a soul that will never die. And because God has called this life into existence, a human being's life is sacred and holy, and therefore carries with it a great dignity, lasting through a lifetime and on to eternity. The most important foundation in understanding human dignity is that life begins at conception and ends with a natural death. But there's a surprising argument taking place all over the world, a question that resurfaces in almost every age and nation. It is a debate which obtains many different answers. This vital debate centers around one question: what makes a human person a human person? The answer haunts philosophers, politicians, and biologists. Around the world, new laws are being created every day based on different answers to this question. The truth is, no one is really safe while they continue to decide what makes a human a human. And maybe a more important question, who will get to decide who is a person and worthy of the dignity and rights given to man? These questions and more await us. Come with us as we expose mankind's identity crisis and establish the criteria for the one true answer. The nights are on now. It's nighttime.
Jesus is in the synagogue reading and praying the ancient prayers of the Jews.
O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou know when I sit down and when I rise up. Thou discern my thoughts from afar. Thou searches out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, lo, O Lord, thou knows it altogether. Thou dost beset me behind and before, and lay thy hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it. Where shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend to heaven, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there thy hand shall lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. If I say, let only darkness cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to thee. The night is bright as day, for darkness is as light with thee. For thou didst form my inward parts. Thou didst knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise thee, for thou art fearful and wonderful. Wonderful are thy works. Thou know me right well. My frame was not hidden from thee when I was being made in secret, intricately wrought in the depths of the earth. Thy eyes beheld my unformed substance. In thy book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. How precious to me are thy thoughts, O God! How vast is the sum of them! If I would count them, they are more than the sand. When I awake, I am still with thee.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Warn World News. I'm Dan.
And I'm Mary. Today's top story, to be or not to be, that is the question. Who is a human person worthy of life and protection? And who is not? And who gets to decide this tremendous fate?
The science of biology agrees. A human is made up of a specific set of chromosomes with its DNA. Biology is clear that our genetic makeup is very different from a dog or a chimpanzee. If someone comes from two human parents, they must be human, right? The answer seems simple then. A human is a human.
But Peter Singer, a modern philosopher, declares that for a human to be worthy of life, he must meet a certain criteria. According to this philosopher, none of the following are worthy of life or protection: unborn babies, disabled children, infants through 18 months, or the elderly.
Many others have voiced their opinions. Some claim, in order to be a person, you must have brain activity. Others say there must be a functioning nervous system. Some demand that to be a person, you must not be dependent on another, while others declare you must provide a significant contribution to society to be worthy of society's protection.
Representatives from Planned Parenthood will even go so far as to say that a baby is a parasite within a woman's body, and it is therefore acceptable to treat this unborn baby like a disease or a threat against the mother.
The ungodly arguments in this arena are endless. Different people with varying educations and varying degrees of authority have different opinions. But the main point is this: should any government be allowed to declare by law who is a human person, worthy of dignity and protection?
History gives us countless tragic examples of what happens when one race decides it is greater than another. Centuries ago, Egypt enslaved the entire race of Israelites. The Roman Empire enslaved men, women, and children of every color. England colonized countries throughout the world, making slavery a very profitable business. In colonial America, white people claimed dominance. Native Americans were considered savages, and Africans were not considered human.
World War II began when a man named Adolf Hitler dictated that he was the head of a perfect race. Only those with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a certain religion were part of that supreme race. Everyone else, they were no longer a human person. This resulted in the torture, experimentation, starvation, and the death of millions.
In 1994, another tragic human holocaust took place in Rwanda, Africa. A mass murder of almost 1 million people. Soldiers and government officials organized a pre-planned campaign of slaughter over a period of 100 days. Leaders of the genocide publicly stirred the conflict, referring to the enemy tribe as cockroaches. In the last half-century, more than 5 million have been brutally murdered in the Congo. Obviously, without God, mankind will never respect the dignity of life.
Throughout all of history, this lack of respect for one's fellow man has defined our human condition. But the greatest and most gruesome example of this started in 1973, when the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that unborn human beings were not to be considered persons and therefore were not protected by the country's laws. As a result, medical terms like embryo and fetus are used to depersonalize an unborn child as something that has absolutely no legal rights. These human embryos comprise the largest holocaust of innocent victims in the world.
What if our laws were changed slightly further in the same direction, and children under the age of 12 were not protected, along with those who are too old, too young, too sick, too handicapped, or too religious? What if someday these laws apply to you? Then would you stand up to it?
God created man in his image and likeness. The devil has worked for centuries to destroy this one basic fact. For heaven's sake, return to the basics. A person is a person, no matter how small, how old, how unhealthy, or how smart. It is simply that simple, and we draw the line there.
Signing off for WARN World News, I'm Mary.
And I'm Dan. You have been warned.
Come on. Come here, little fellas. Bet, bet. Just a little bit further. Come on. Don't turn back. You're almost there.
Mini Positive, what's going on? Who are you talking to?
Oh, no one at the moment. I'm just practicing your basic lessons on herding the sheep. I'm distracting the silly sheep from real issues by leading them in circles.
Ah, yes. An all-important lesson. The Roman dictators perfected it. Focus the masses on food, festivals, and pleasure in order to distract them from what really matters.
Today, I've been focusing on entertainment, sports, and cheap fast food.
Nice.
But in the unlikely event they happen to get off the circle trail and get into something that actually matters, I get serious.
I'd like to hear what you mean.
Okay, let's say the sheep are following along the way they always do, and one of them gets off track and gets all excited about abortion. She jumps on her high horse and says, "This is a baby. I can't kill my baby. Here's how I handle that. You poor thing. Your situation is so desperate. You could never care for that child. It's so unfair. You have to focus on yourself, your education, your career, your freedom. You'll lose them all if that baby is born. If your situation were different, then of course you could give that child the life it deserves. But now is not the time. Besides, it's not really a baby. At this stage of development, it's just a clump of cells." Now, on the other hand, of course, you know that's not true. Of course it's a baby. What else could it be? All it needs is nutrition and environment, and it'll grow up just fine. Yeah, but don't think about that. Think about what you want to wear tonight, where you want to eat. Think about what movie is on. Focus on what is important to you, instead of that little problem. I mean, sure, she'd be just like her mommy. Sure, she'll have your smile.
Hold on, Mini Positive. You can't tell them the little soul is like her mom and all she needs is nourishment and a safe environment to live in. Tell her the fetus is nothing more than a piece of tissue. The mother is the victim here. The fetus is just a nuisance.
Sorry, Mr. Positive. Right. Back to the lies. A human life is only worthwhile if it can contribute to society. Unborn babies are worthless, and certainly not as important as the mother. The same goes for the crippled, the sick, and the elderly.
Now you're getting it. Words have magical power, Mini Positive. If our words are clever enough, we can turn an unborn human person into an inviable embryo. We can turn a child into a choice. We can even turn a baby into a parasite. In the end, the whole thing is about freedom and choice, not murder and death. Worldwide, 1 out of every 5 pregnancies end in the murder of a human being. You can't argue with those numbers, not to mention the emotional catastrophe left in the wake of all those abortions.
Sounds good to me. And that's a lot less sheep for me to keep track of. Come on. Hey, look at that. A free cheeseburger. Follow me. That's it. Good boy. Mr. Positive, from the looks of these sheep, we won't ever have to worry about that serious stuff anyways. This circle trail seems to fit them just fine. Bah, 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 bah.
Hello everyone and welcome to Time for Common Sense. Today we have with us the president of the Ingolstadt Research Lab. He's here to tell us about some revolutionary breakthroughs in scientific research and what we may expect to see in the near future. Let's welcome Dr. Frankenstein. Dr. Frankenstein, you were recently reported as saying that you were working on a project that would change the world. Would you mind bringing us up to speed in regards to the most recent scientific advances of embryonic stem cell research?
As I'm sure you've heard, the archaic floodgates have been opened and almost all restrictions have been lifted. For years, scientists have waited for world leaders to lift the restrictions and to give us the billions of dollars needed to fund our experiments. Now there will be no limit to our imagination.
And with these bans lifted, what do you see coming into effect right away?
For the first time, we can move forward to test our theories. For years, scientists have wondered about the possibility of curing cancer or even regenerating the human spine. But now, finally, with a change in the political climate, we can proceed in ways that weren't allowed before.
If this work was so groundbreaking, why put restrictions in the first place?
Ignorance, nothing but ignorance. People do not understand the vast possibilities. With access to these valuable embryos, and being able to conduct vital new experiments, it may be possible one day to see more effective medical treatments. While the promise of embryonic stem cell research remains unknown, we still believe that these human embryos may have some potential to help us.
I'm sorry, did you say start with human embryos?
Of course, you simpleton. Why do you think there was such a huge debate?
Okay, this is starting to make a lot more sense. Where do human embryos come from?
My dear, where have you been? They come from fertility research clinics. The laboratories create thousands of embryos and freeze them for possible pregnancy implants, and the leftover frozen embryos are donated to us for research.
Oh, okay. Perhaps I am simple, because what I think you're saying is that you take a live fertilized egg, which is just a few days old, put him in a test tube and experiment on him? You experiment on a live human being.
Ridiculous, absurd! What an unintelligent thing to say. We do not experiment on live human beings. Oh no.
Oh no? Aren't the embryos alive? If they were dead, you wouldn't be able to use them, right? Or if they were implanted in the mother's womb, 9 months later you would have a baby, right?
I am shocked that you could scientifically think that a
5-day-old embryo is actually a human person. I am shocked.
You're shocked? I'm horrified that an educated doctor doesn't understand the difference between being alive or dead.
No one knows when human personhood actually begins, and I can assure you, it is far beyond me to claim to know such truths.
No, stop. Just stop right there. Human life begins at conception. How can you deny that?
All we can say is that the human heart begins to beat thump at 18 days. But in the first few days, nothing of any significance happens that can qualify an embryo as a legal human person.
Doctor, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't everything a baby needs already present at the moment of conception? I mean, at that very moment, every feature of the child is basically determined. His hair color, eye color, height, skin, personality. There isn't one more thing to be added but the proper environment and nutrition for life.
Well, taken out of context, yes, that is true. But at this stage, it is smaller than a mustard seed. And it looks nothing like a real person. Scientifically, it's nothing more than a clump of cells, with no legal rights.
Biology 101, in context or out of context, every single human being starts just like that embryo, looks like that embryo, and develops just like that embryo. That is exactly what you looked like when you were 5 days old in your mother's womb. First of all, every advancement in stem cell research has been made from adult stem cells. Even the church approves this work because no people are harmed. But there is a world of difference between that and embryonic stem cell research. Medical success from embryonic stem cell research remains non-existent. Tell me, how many victims have to be sacrificed for the sake of this experiment? People, it's definitely time for common sense. While it's true that science has done incredible things, to experiment on human beings is not one of them. And where does it end? There must be a limit to scientists and their diabolical experiments. The destruction of millions of live embryos sounds like a horror film that doesn't end when you walk out of the theater. Media lies and situation ethics have worn us down. But the fact is, all human life is sacred. We are all made in the image and likeness of God. Life begins at conception, so unborn babies and their mothers must be defended. In the same way, we must protect life at every other age, regardless of race or physical and mental ability. Stand up for the sanctity of life now, because if you don't, someday the life you defend may be your own. I'm Miss Liz, and that's Common Sense.
Here we see the number of deaths caused by war in the 20th century. War and violence have killed many people, and the number of deaths is high. But this is the number resulting from legal abortions since 1973 in the United States and around the world. We can see now, in the 21st century, life is being disregarded more than ever. We have taken one more step towards the grave. Through diabolical experimentation and research on human embryos, the dignity of human life is gone, and the destruction of human life has only begun. These numbers will be nothing compared to what lies in the future. The fact is, truth is truth no matter who disagrees with it. A person is a person made in the image and likeness of God, regardless of age, skin color, size, or mental capacity. If we don't stand up and defend this truth today, don't be surprised if in a few years from now, personhood becomes even more of a vague term. Our law, our hospitals, our research laboratories all need to reach an agreement. Human life and personhood begin at fertilization and must be protected. Human beings should not be experimented on, and science should be used to defend life, not destroy it. We must recognize personhood for every single human being, from conception until natural death, and only God should decide when we live and when we die. Proclaim God's message that life is sacred,
from the valley to the mountaintops, before it is too late.
President of the Ingolstadt Research Lab. He's very tall and can explain. No, stop it.
As I'm sure you've heard, the archaic floodgates have been opened and nearly all restrictions have been lifted. Scientists have wondered
This is strictly English.
Well, taken out of context, yes, that is true, but in the first few days, it looks nothing like a real person, and at this stage, human personhood.